Well, hello there. Good evening. Welcome to the latest of the Spitfire Sessions during this barren cricket season so far. Together with Shepherd Neame, we are putting Kent Cricket directly onto your device via Zoom and Facebook Live. It's Steve here. Steve Watt's still at home. I've got a terrific panel tonight. We have a feel on our panel tonight of reminiscing. We have an international flavour tonight, and we do have a bit of a Dover connection. One of the Dover lads is actually missing, but more on that in just a moment. Before we crack on and introduce tonight's panel, a little bit of housekeeping to let you know about. You probably heard last week that the ECB confirmed there's going to be no domestic cricket until the 1st of August at the earliest. Hopefully it might be some internationals before that. And Derek Aslett celebrated his 92nd birthday yesterday. Derek Aslett, a legend of Kent cricket, of two sports, Derek Aslett. So very happy belated 92nd birthday to Derek, and our current director of cricket, Paul Downton, and Sam Billings, our captain, sat down with Derek Upton to discuss his career in the latest edition of Kent Cricket in Conversation. You can have a look at that via Kent's website or Facebook page. And Kent Cricket has also joined the Raise the Bat campaign to recognise the efforts of those key workers who've gone above and beyond in the current crisis. As part of the ECB's Together Through This Test campaign, Kent and the ECB are asking people to use social media and the hashtag #RaiseTheBat to share stories of key workers within the cricket community. Make sure you get involved in that on social media using the hashtag #RaiseTheBat. Right, let's crack on with tonight's Spitfire session as we take you back all the way to the 1980s on Zoom and on Facebook Live. Our continued thanks to Spitfire and to Shepherd Neame. We've got your questions that you sent over in advance. Thank you for those. You can get involved while we're chatting. If you have something you want to put to our panel tonight, you can do that on Zoom, on the Q&A section, and on the comment section on Facebook. Send your questions over. While we are talking, let's introduce the first of tonight's panelists who made his debut for Kent in 1981. 5 wickets against the 1984 West Indian side on Test debut. 569 wickets, over 6,000 runs for Kent in 337 appearances between 1981 and 1994. In 1986, this panelist was named a Wisden Cricketer of the Year, and since playing, has become a head of cricket at Millfield School and also a match referee for the ECB. A very good evening to Richard Ellison. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
Good. 1984, that West Indian team, that was a very, very, very good West Indian side, if I remember.
I think all the guys would agree who played against them, be it for county or say at a different level. The relentless pace was a problem for the batsmen. How batsmen scored runs, I don't know. The 84 side, the 86 side, throughout the 80s, phenomenal, really, really tough.
We'll talk more about that later on, I'm sure. Let's introduce our next panellist, who is a mainstay at the top of the order for Kent for 16 years between 1979 and 1995. 541 matches for Kent, nearly 25,000 runs, an average of nearly 48 centuries since retirement. This person has worked extensively in the high performance arena, formerly a director of cricket at St Dunstan's College and Epsom College, and has managed Kent's county age group sides for many years. Good evening, Neil Taylor.
Evening, Steve. Thanks for inviting me onto this. It's a real pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, old Bean. This is Kent in the 1980s, but your stats here, you go back to the 70s and you go right the way through half of the 90s as well. That's a fair old innings.
Yeah, 79, so only the right at the end of it. Yeah, but it was a pleasurable experience playing for all those years, and I think probably if someone had asked me at the start of my cricketing career, you'd play for that length of time and those number of games, you'd have snapped their hands off.
Let's introduce our third panellist for this evening, who made his debut for Kent in 1981. 214 appearances for the county, retiring in 1987. Well over 8,000 runs at an average of 32, 14 centuries, a best score of 221 not out against Sri Lanka at the Spitfire ground, or as it was called then, the St Lawrence ground. That was in 1984. Since then, this person has emigrated to Perth in Western Australia. That's since hanging up the old boots and the bats, and has set up an antiques business in the city. It's a great pleasure to welcome from Down Under, Derek Aslett. I was going to say good evening, or is it good morning? What is it?
It's good morning on Tuesday, yeah. So good morning, Steve, or good evening to you. Thanks for inviting me on.
It's a pleasure to have you. What's this, the antiques business you moved into? I'm just thinking, what counts as an antique in Australia? But 1990, something that's old enough, is it?
Yeah, it's the normal 100 years. So now it's 1920. Can you
really?
Believe?
Okay.
Yeah, apparently.
The fourth person who should be joining us, I'll give him the big build-up should he manage to log on, but I've got to be honest and say it's not looking hopeful. We were hoping to be joined, and we have fingers crossed that we still may be, by Chris Penn tonight. Have any of you guys heard from Chris Penn? I haven't seen anything of him since we all logged on half an hour ago.
No, always on the bench, Penny. But it was 12th man for a lot of those times, so he's managed to do it again tonight.
Do you know what? I thought I was rubbish with this technology. It's making me feel a whole lot better about myself. Just before we get into the first of the sent-in advanced questions, Derek, what's lockdown like in Australia? Is it all over? Are you out and about and a few bars, restaurants? What's going on?
Yeah, it's pretty much all over, and it's been fairly lame compared to what you blokes have, experienced. I mean, for most of the time, we've been able to go out, walk around. My shop's been open, which has been a real blessing. And now we're pretty much back to normal. Next Friday, all the pubs are going to be open, the restaurants, cafes. But even through this, we've been able to go and have a walk and pop in for a takeaway cafe. So it hasn't been too bad.
Good. I'm glad you're out and about. Let's hope we are soon as well. Let's get into the first of our advanced questions for tonight, which was sent in by Anonymous, who's involved every single week. Let's start with Neil Taylor on this one. Who was your favourite teammate at Kent? Obviously, present company accepted. Who was your favourite teammate at Kent during your career, and why?
My closest colleague and friend would have been Graham Dilley. I mean, we grew up playing Kent schools cricket, and we both played in the same year, under 15s. We started off our county pathway together. He was a number 3 batsman who was fourth to change, and I opened the bowling and batted number 8. And that quickly changed. Within about 5 years, he was opening the bowling for England on an Ashes tour. So different parts, different sort of bits of cricket that we played there. But no, Graham would have been my closest friend, and we both, that was one of the reasons when I changed clubs early on in my career to Dartford, was he was playing there, and it was a nice sort of transition into that club because he was my best mate at that time.
Sadly missed, of course, Graham Dilley. When we had a Kent session about the 90s a couple of weeks ago, Steve Marsh was on, and he said he was maybe the most difficult, certainly the most interesting person that he ever kept to, Graham Dilley, particularly that sort of dip and late swing after the ball had gone past the bat. Perhaps, Richard, you'd have a view on that.
I know Dill, I don't know how he had the ability to do it, but I never kept wicket at all. But he had this ability, Dill, when after the ball had pitched, it seemed to dip and swing to the keeper, and that's why Marshy would have said what he said, because he was difficult to speak to keep to, I should imagine, and he was quick as well. He was genuinely quick.
All right, you better give us your favourite Kent teammate from your era then.
Well, I remember going out with Neil Taylor and Graham Dilley in the early days. So Dill is missed, sure, definitely. Another very good mate of mine who was only at Kent for a short period of time was a chap called Nigel Felton, who Derek and Neil will know. And then through school, I was at school with Chris Cowdery. So I tended to spend quite a lot of time with him. So I'd like to think everyone got on with each other. I'm not going to say there was a favourite teammate, but you spent more time with certain people than other people. I would never say I had a favourite teammate. I'd like to think you got on with everyone.
All right, Derek, I'm still going to throw the question at you, whether you're going to sit on that Australian fence or not. But did you have a favourite teammate?
I think Richard's answer is probably the same as what mine is. All the guys were good, and they all had different things that they offered. You know, Chris Penn obviously came through Dover with me, even though he was 5 years younger. Eldine Baptiste was always fun to play with, and I roomed with him. He was a great team man, and you know, a good player. But looking back, I think as we grow older, we probably begin to appreciate each other more. You've got to remember, we spent a lot of time together, and you know, I think, as Richard said, we all got on, even if we didn't necessarily click individually with each other. So yeah, it was such a good experience, a life experience, meeting and playing with all those guys.
Hmm.
You mentioned Eldine Baptiste there. So I was just going to say, players of that era, the 1980s, overseas players, players who had a big impact. What about someone like a Terry Alderman back in the day? You would have been around in those days. Yeah,
I played against him a couple of times out here as well, which was amusing. I mean, he was never short of a word. He always had a beer afterwards, and you could always have a laugh with him, so it was fine. But he was just a super bowler. He swung it late. He brought one back in. He bowled a reasonable bouncer. And, I mean, he was very much like Marshall, but just a couple of yards quicker. And, of course, he scored his 50 at Hastings when Deadly scored 100, which was a great day.
Oh, Hastings. Yeah. Do you know, in the winter, I went down to what was the Hastings Springs, a shopping centre now. Absolutely desperate.
Isn't it?
It's terrible. Yeah. Anyway, so talking about overseas players of that era, Neil, we have a view on this.
Hello.
Oh.
Is that Penny shouting?
Hello.
Have you been fishing?
It's like watching my uncles.
This is great, we can't see it, but anyway, we can hear. This is Chris Penn, I think, joining us, everybody.
Indeed, Steve, it is. Good evening.
Hello.
He's just fishing his current.
Shall I give Chris
if you've
Penn
got
his big
face on there, I look too young, so that's why you've kept me off.
You haven't got a neck, I know that. Let's have Chris Penn's introduction here. Chris Penn, 1982 to 1994, 405 wickets, 233 appearances for the county, 2 Tests, 2 one-day internationals for England under 19s back in the early 80s. Player of the year when Kent finished second in the championship in 1988. Testimonial year, used to be called benefits, didn't they, in 1996. And spent time as a specialist bowling coach to Kent and England women under Paul Farbrace, who of course is heavily linked with Kent. So good evening, Chris Penn. We can't see you, but you can say officially good evening now.
Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening. How are you?
There he is.
I tell you what, I look younger than those fellas.
Dear.
It's because you are.
That's because you are. Thank you very much. Good evening, Steve. Sorry about that.
Good evening. I'm not sure it's improved since your face has appeared, but anyway, I'm going to throw this first question that we had to the other guys just before you joined us, which was, back in the 80s, your favourite Kent teammate and why? Just to let you know, Neil Taylor said Chris Penn, Derek Aslett said Chris Penn, and Richard Ellison said Chris Penn. But Chris Penn, who was your favourite Kent teammate back in the 80s?
Probably didn't have any, to be honest. No one in particular. Probably someone like Alan Wells, who played at Sussex.
Controversial. Neil, where was I before we got rudely interrupted?
No, honestly,
that overseas player.
They were all great mates, They're decent fellas at the ones that are there. But I suppose I was brought up with the antique dealer from Australia on he's on my right in the top corner there. But so we were very close as youngsters. But my closest mate, I suppose, I shared a lot of things with. I travelled the world with Ellie and Neil, as well was Alan Eggleston. God bless him.
Alan Eggleston. Yeah, there's a name. Neil, can we come back to the subject, please, of overseas players in the 1980s? Never did get your answer on that.
Our overseas, Terry Alderman was outstanding. I think he got 175 wickets in 2 seasons for us, sort of 96 in the first year. He came in 84 and he missed 6 games. He came over late because he was on tour in the West Indies. Bowled so many overs he wasn't fit enough to play the last 3, but he was an outstanding cricketer for us. And then obviously He went on the Ashes 85 tour over here and then came back and took 75 wickets in his second and final year. He was the best overseas bowler that Kent have had during my period of time. Probably, I can't think of anyone better. I don't know what the other guys think, but he was outstanding for us.
Chris, you got a view on this as you've just joined us?
Yeah, I had some great. I mean, I first started with Ellie, Neil, and Derek there. Asif Iqbal was a superb Pakistani all-rounder. Trying to think of somebody different, I'd have to say Roy Pienaar. Roy Pienaar, at the latter stages of the 80s, it was pretty underachieving. He had a better perm than Ellie as well. His hair was a lot better. Yeah, it sat better when he bowled. But yeah, he's a tremendous fella, was Roy Pienaar, very underrated. But of course, Carl Hooper was a little bit later in the early 90s. But yeah, we were blessed with some good overseas pros and some good ones that didn't always take the field as much as perhaps they should have done. Someone like perhaps Hartley Elaine, Tony Merrick, for whatever reasons. Ellie's laughing there. I don't know why he's laughing.
Just you mentioned Roy Pienaar there. I'm thinking back to the late 80s now and that really good team. Any regret, any sort of disappointments about coming that close in the county championship that year?
Yeah, they dug the pitch up, didn't they, at Worcester? They dug up where I bowled. They dug the middle up. So rather than digging it up on the length. So what they was allowed, Worcester got away with it. But some fella, didn't he get under the covers and try to pitch up to save us? But that year we only lost by 1 point. I remember we played at Warwickshire, and Warwickshire we only were able to take 8 wickets in an innings, so we lost out on a bonus point. And I think the rules would change after that. That's our excuse, anyway.
Gutting, must have been gutting.
I think we were 50 points clear at that stage, and we were sort of thinking, well, 1 point won't make a huge difference. I mean, Warwickshire had 2 men that couldn't bat because they both retired hurt. We won the game by an innings, but we didn't get the bonus point, as Penny said, and we ended up with 23 points for the game rather than 24. And little did we know, sort of probably 2 or 3 months down the line, how important that 1 point was going to be.
It was. I remember, Neil, the last wicket we had to get. It was a South African quick bowler, and Chris Cowdrey told me to bounce him. No one heard of him. Anyway, it was Alan Donald. Anyway, subsequent years he got his own back. But anyway, there you go. I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
That's someone you don't want to be upsetting, isn't it, Alan Donald? A question came in here from Malcolm. For the 2 Dover boys on the panel tonight, do you ever regret not playing for Kent at Crabble? Of course, back in the day, Kent used to play at Dover. Any reminiscences about playing down there? I only ever went to watch football at Crabble, never any cricket.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in Dover and the club, Chris's father and my father both played for Dover, and in the early years, Kent played there every year until 1976. So yes, it was quite a disappointment not to be able to play there for Kent. But we did play a benefit game there in '85, which was good fun. Do you remember that, Chris? Did you play in that one?
Yes, I did, Derek. I played in that one. Yeah, I think that's probably the last gathering of some decent players down there. I mean, even Kent's second team cricket disappeared after that, really, didn't it? But yeah, I mean, the pitch was horrendous, to be honest. And I mean, I'm not sure. Eddie probably played for Beckenham down there. Neil certainly played down there, but the pitch was a horrendous pitch to play on. And also, if you watch football down there, Steve. Originally, it used to be a football pitch down there, but the rugby pitches on both sides made the outfield also pretty treacherous, to be honest. But
and it didn't really bounce, did it, Christopher? But you did your best to try and make it bounce. Right for years.
I think I've lost the signal, Steve. Is it still? I think the Australian connection's cutting out. Yeah.
Hey, listen, at least he was here on time. He was here on time. Listen, it's 2 o'clock in the morning for Derek, and he was here on time, Chris Penn. You're not really in a position to have
He's just come in, I'd imagine. You know what they're like.
He hasn't got me to look after him, has he? That's the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the subject of Dover and outgrounds, and we were talking about Hastings just a second ago, which is now a card factory, which is does anyone on this panel, let's have a chat with Richard Ellison about this. Anyone here, particularly you, Ellie, think that it's a sad time that we don't use so many outgrounds these days?
I can see why clubs don't use them, because moving cricket around the county is an expensive business. But in the time when we were playing, taking cricket to the public, and you generally got a good crowd. The Moat, Tunbridge Wells, Dartford, they were packed out. So you can see the value of it to the public. I'm not sure how economically viable it was. And it's a shame it's become what it has in many respects. I'm trying to think of some clubs who use more than one ground, and there aren't many. It is a shame.
Neil, did you Neil have any favourite outgrounds when you were playing away from home?
I think I liked Scarborough. I think that was a nice place to go and play cricket. For me, you preferred to play at the main centres. They were better set out for us. And as Richard said, at Penn we were really fortunate to go around and play around the county, but we were playing 24, 26 first-class games at that time. So you could afford to have Tunbridge Wells week, or Dartford would have a week, or Maidstone, the Moat would have a week, because it was only 6 games. Now, when you've only got sort of 9 home games, you can't really justify the expense of taking round the game to other clubs. And the supporters, quite rightly, were sort of happy for the games to go on at those grounds, but then the facilities, especially at somewhere like Dartford, where they'd have a couple of logs and a plank would be the seating area, wasn't particularly received well by the supporters that then came and watched. But no, I enjoyed the vagaries of playing on different pitches and different grounds, especially in your own county.
And in those days, did you have a 2-3 day games and a Sunday league match somewhere in the middle? Is that how it used to work?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember playing a Sunday league game at Dartford, but I can remember obviously Maidstone, you'd have the week, Tunbridge Wells, you'd have the week, so you'd play Saturday. Folkestone, you'd be down there if, but again, the counties didn't have, like they do now, control over the pitches, so you were left to in some of those grounds, council employees to prepare the wickets, obviously overseen by the county groundsman, but the best pitch was invariably the Moat, which Malcolm Bristow, the groundsman at that time, would prepare for batting anyway. I'm not sure if bowlers would agree, but that was probably our best surface in the county for a long, long time.
Appreciate a view on it.
I played one game at Dartford, which was Neil's original home ground before we adopted him as a docker in the Dover area. But I always remember the ball, Matthew Fleming, one of his early games, the ball was struck out into, because Dartford had a nickname, I won't say it on air, and the ball rolled through, some dog had left behind. And the ball, Fleming was bowling, so I think it might have been Neil myself, we were fielding at mid-off or mid-on, knew it had gone in this thing that had been delivered. And it was thrown back to Fleming, who put his fingers in his mouth to get some saliva and then polished the ball. And Fleming, who wanted to sue the Sun because they said he was the 50th richest person in the country, and he said he wasn't, he was the 10th, said if I ever take over the Fleming dynasty, I'm going to buy this something ground and build a hotel on it. And that was all because of this outground. Which is quite sad, really. Quite sad. All because he didn't want to polish the ball. Yeah. Anyway, but there you go. But no, I think outground, what Ellie said earlier about taking the game round to people is crucial, really. It is crucial. And I think Folkestone Cricket Club have invested a lot of money down there through Roger DeHaan, and obviously they've got the big sports centre down there now. It's a shame that we can't go there. Having said that, we've got Beckenham, where the posh boys come from.
Oh yeah, that's me, lovely, and someone else on this panel as well. Just want to apologise, by the way, after that story about Matthew Fleming and not polishing the ball, because some people will be watching this with their tea on their lap right now, so I do apologise for that. Derek, did you use like the outgrounds, home and away?
Yeah, look, Hastings, I always enjoyed for some reason. I didn't score many runs there, but it was just such a nice ground, and the seagulls, the sea air. Bright Hove was good. As far as home grounds are concerned, yeah, I think I probably agree with Neil. The Moat was a good bouncy wicket and was a good cricket wicket. And here, I mean, coming to Australia, when I first came here in 1980, the Wacker was such a unbelievable surface to play on, you know, just hard, bouncy and fast. That was a real experience. And of course the nets there, which are famous, you know, for even being faster and bouncier than the main ground itself.
Richard, we mentioned earlier when we introduced you that 1984 West Indies team that you made your debut against for England. All we ever see on the TV here is 2005 Ashes, obviously the greatest series according to a lot of pundits. But that 1985 Ashes, which you were involved in, I know Australia were a very different proposition in those days, but they were golden days, weren't they, that summer for English cricket?
Well, I don't want to personalise this, but I had my 15 minutes in the sun. And you could say, you hear Gower talk, Gower scored 750 runs. And the Aussie side, to be fair, I think there'd been some defectors who'd gone to South Africa. So they wouldn't have had their full side. And you ask any Englishman if they're playing against Australia, or any Australian who's playing against an Englishman, that's the contest, that's the game, that's how it's competitive. Whether it certainly won the Ashes in 2005 was phenomenal cricket by both teams. And because the Ashes hadn't been won by England in this country for such a long time, it had so much more significance, you could say. 85 for me, just being part of that, was memorable. And that's all I can say, really. The 2005 win was some of the cricket played and the tightness of the games, the quality of the players, and people will remember that for sure.
Is it me, or do I watch those old films of David Gower batting, who you mentioned there, who was the skipper, of course, then? Talk about a Rolls Royce of a player. My goodness me, it's smooth as silk at the crease.
Yeah, I mean, if you hear him talk, and there's been various things on Sky, you know, he had that cover drive, which he played quite casually, you could say. But if it hit the middle of the bat, it's a glorious shot. If he nicked it to slips, he was going to get criticised for playing a loose shot. But he just has so much freedom and can play both sides of the wicket. And like anyone, you go in and out of form as a batter, and Neil is more equipped to tell you than I am. But when you're in nick, you feel you can probably do anything. And Gower had that run where everything he touched was gold, basically.
I'm going to move on to another question here, which was sent in advance by Graham. I'm going to start with you, Neil, on this one, which is, what was the degree of sledging in your playing days, and what effect did it have on you? Did you give back as good as you got? I dare say there may not be any sledging stories that perhaps you can tell us right now, but if there are, we'd be grateful to hear them.
Oh, I think you got sledged when you were a young player because you were a nuisance, weren't you? Sort of, I think you can go back to playing Surrey in those days, and people like Robin Jackman would give you a pretty comprehensive working over. A lot of the time is you looked at that as a little badge of honour because it meant you were probably getting some runs or doing something reasonable at that time. But yeah, I think there was more sort of sledging. The West Indians didn't need the sledge because they'd look at you and think this is a wicket that's going to be mine pretty quickly. So I think it was, the phrase now is banter, wasn't it? Some of it was humorous, some of it was personal. I think it was a lot for us, and we were all the same. That, you know, that was what the lovely thing about playing for Kent was, that you were playing with your mates, and we'd all grown up together. And Kent at that stage was a county that I think probably had all Kent players in the side for a long period of time, which was fantastic for that. But you know, I didn't take it personally. I think there were certain people you might have had a go back, but there were certainly people that you didn't. Both of them used to think it was a particularly annual feast for him to have a go at me on a constant basis. But you know, he was entitled to do that. He was quite good.
So it wasn't bad, yeah. Did you take it then as a compliment if you were being sledged? And as a follow-up to that, were there some bowlers and some teams who would just sledge regardless, even if they were well on top?
Yeah, I think, you know, we see it now. We've all been involved in, especially sort of Richard and Chris and myself have been involved in youth cricket and seeing youngsters coming through. And you play against, you watch your young charges at that stage nowadays, and you listen to the noise that comes from certain teams that you play against, and you think, well, you could make as much noise as you want. It doesn't actually impact on your performance necessarily. A, is the team that are doing it, and B, if you're good enough, the team that they're trying to unsettle. So, you know, those sort of things. There were certain teams that did it. I can remember Jack Russell one year when I'd gone to Sussex, and he just stood behind me for the whole of the morning session, constantly talking, constantly in your ear. And it was actually the stage he came off at lunchtime and had a headache. We went back out after lunch, and he turned around to his slip or silly point who was close in and said, "Right, guys, silence this afternoon. No, we're not going to make a noise." And I just turned around and said, "Thanks, that's perfect. I've got a headache from the morning session. Your silence this afternoon will actually be really enjoyable."
Derek, now that you live on the wrong side of the planet, did you find when you were moving down under that actually your sledging, your level of banter got better? You're famed for it, these Aussies.
Well, I mean, I expected that there would be a lot of sledging when I got here, but I was actually quite disappointed that, you know, there wasn't a great deal of it. And of course, the quality wasn't that good because the vocabulary is not that extensive here.
Is that Dover or Australia?
Really good if some of the boys here were listening, but they probably heard it all before. But I think, I'm not sure, I think you were playing, Neil, but we had that famous game in '85, which was hilarious, when we basically had a second 11 playing against the Australian side, which to be quite honest, was not much better than a second 11 side anyway. And they thought they'd wind us up a bit when we went out to bat in the second innings. So then we thought, well, I think they had about 130 to win, and we decided with Baptiste and Cowdery opening the bowling that we'd really give it to them in every sense of the word. And it was just funny. I mean, they were I think Graham Wood it was, and who was the other opening batsman? Hilditch. They actually complained to the umpires because we were sledging and being so nasty. Well, we weren't actually being nasty, we were just laughing at them.
I think the two players were Dirk Wellham. Was it Dirk Wellham?
Oh, Dirk, yeah. He did it.
Yeah.
And Greg Ritchie, who accused me of wearing a chest pad, which I did. So I accused him of wearing one when he came in, and he wasn't actually wearing some. I just said to him,
what on both sides?
He was wearing a stomach pad.
At the front, slip down a bit.
Well, we had to open with Cowdery and Baptiste at the second innings because we were hiding our sort of secret weapon, Ellison, who'd taken wickets, I think, probably. Did you play at bowling? England had sort of decreed that we had to hide him in the second innings because he was going to be picked in the Test match, and they didn't want the Australians seeing too much of him after he'd got a few wickets in the first innings. So Cowdery and Baptiste were our spearhead against Wellham and Graham Wood and Alan Border.
Laurie Potter tells a story of how he spoke with John Jameson a few years later, and John was the umpire that day, or one of the umpires, and he said it was the best day's cricket he's umpired.
Chris Penn, did you used to dish it out when you were bowling?
Oh dear.
No, not at all, really. No, I was more of a technician when it came to bowling. Just let the ball do the talking, really.
Okay.
Of course, being a phantom quick bowler, I suppose I had to have other things up my sleeve. So as someone said a moment ago, you have to wait for the situation in a game to spark off, and then perhaps the banter does start. It's very difficult to initiate it. More often than not, Steve, a lot of the decisions, if it revolved around a bad or conceivably bad umpiring decision, and then the game would erupt and certain people would get the brunt of it. Mark Rampakash is no longer on my Christmas card list, having not opened any for 30 years. Mind you, I haven't opened any of his for 30 years, but yeah, there were certain personalities that you could have a duel with, so to speak.
You
yeah,
always
good
used
fun.
to enjoy playing against Elliot Beckenham, didn't you?
No, Derek, don't draw me in, Derek. Don't draw me, trying to draw me in now, Steve. Elliot, no, he's a fine all-rounder. You know, we've shared many a bedroom together, Ellie and I. So I'm not going to get drawn in, Derek. I'm not going to get drawn in. But
I was going to ask Richard, actually, did you used to let the ball do the talking? And as you moved into a more, how can I put this, overseeing role after retiring, were you the poacher turned gamekeeper as telling lads to cut that stuff out that maybe you used to do a little bit?
I probably was, yeah. I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't say anything to a batsman. I certainly did. What I said, I'm not going to repeat now because it might be seen as quite offensive. But back then, the only way the game that was going to continue was the bowler's got to turn his back on the batsman to get back to his mark. The umpires controlled what was going on. If you were out of order, you were told, get on with the game, keep your mouth shut. And that's how it was then, from what I can remember. But I'm not gonna. I did say things to batsmen, but generally speaking, you're trying to unsettle them in some way, yeah. But you've got to get back to your mark. You've got to turn your back. The game's got to continue. I think the batsman probably would have said less back to some bowlers. I suppose it just depends on their character and how they are as people. But yeah, I used to have a few words.
I would
It happened.
Club cricket generally was probably worse than the professional game. I would have to say club cricket was in my time, for whatever reasons, I'm not sure, but Ellie and I certainly been involved as bowlers, and the two other lads, the batsmen, have had it, put towards them. But it was more often than not a situation of the game. Club cricket was a slightly different issue, but we could be here all night just talking on this one topic. But yeah, we certainly could get involved.
Can I come back in here, Steve? There was an incident which Penny and I we had a little chat about earlier on. It was at Tunbridge Wells, and we were playing against a certain team, and Penny and I we're getting stuck into one of the batters, and he decided he was going to stop the game, and he did. He stopped the game, and he said, right, you and you, if you want to continue this conversation, I'll see you around the back of the pavilion after the game. And that was it. We shut up after that. Do you remember that, Penny?
I didn't say a word. I didn't say. It's probably those other stuff and all the talking. That word.
You?
Was that David Smith? Yeah.
Yes. Don't you remember that?
I do remember it. Yeah. Yeah, I do. Yeah. I had to get off early.
You had to leave early, did you?
To leave early. Yeah.
Look, one thing I've noticed while you guys have been chatting here is I've noticed while you've been chatting is a lot of Kent cricket camaraderie and a lot of Kent League rivalry while you lot are talking here. And as a question, I hope this isn't the star question. I've been told to shoehorn this one in, which came from Graham Mart. I know you're all looking forward to this. Who was the best captain in Kent League or county cricket that you played under? Derek, do you want to start on this one?
Well, I suppose I better say Graham, better I? Yeah. Yeah. Talking about sledging and rivalry, I mean, Graham was a fierce competitor, particularly against clubs such as the Moat, Beckenham, and Tunbridge Wells. Yeah, Kent League cricket was fabulous. A lot of the guys who who came through, played in the league sides, and it was a really good standard, and some clubs had overseas players. And then you had the old sort of Kent League pros like Bob Hungate and not Eric Bristow, Malcolm Bristow?
Bristow.
Yeah.
Keith Wooding.
Yeah, and John Kilby. Yeah, and Jim Haljago, who played a little bit for Kent too. No, all the captains at Kent were good. They had their different strengths. But Graham was a good lad to play for. I'm not against, though.
Neil, what's the question for you about best captain in Kent League, or indeed county cricket that you played under?
Derek quite rightly said, I mean, I think probably I'm trying to think of the captains at Kent. I'd have started off with Alan Elam when he was his final year as captain, then Asif took over again. Then we went down to sort of having Chris Tavares captain the side, Chris Cowdery taken over, and then for a longer period, Mark Benson. I think one of the guys that I think could have been a really good captain given the opportunity would have been Graham Johnson. I think he didn't have an opportunity in amongst there for various reasons, but I think he had a really good cricket brain. He had a good way with people, and I think he would have made an outstanding captain at Kent. At Dartford, Derek Upton, who you were mentioning, was my captain when I went to Dartford. He taught you how to play the game properly, and made you realise, I think, as a Kent player, your responsibility is not just when you're playing for Kent. Your responsibility is, especially more so when you're not playing for Kent, and people see you in perhaps a little bit more of a relaxed situations, that you need to make sure that you behave in the correct way. And another guy who captained Dartford just after that was a guy called Chris Jobling, who I enjoyed his company and his cricketing prowess when we were playing at Dartford.
Christopher, you must have a view on this. I know you've got a view on this.
Best captain, very inspiring for me as young, was Asif Iqbal. His knowledge of the game, he'd throw you the ball, just even in a difficult situation. So I, as a 17, 18-year-old, to get a chance to play for a Kent first team with him as your captain was quite an inspiring experience. And he was a great man, really. He was a great man, very good thinker of the game. Club cricket, although he did have a limited vocabulary, I would say I'll have to agree with Derek, Dover's Dean Martin, Graham Marr. Inspired me, I suppose, to not give up and not to, don't accept losing too easily. So, but as I said, his use of the adjective, perhaps sometimes, or certain adjectives, perhaps I shouldn't have copied, but I'll put that down to experience.
And Ellie, you're going to give us your captain thoughts there?
The only Kent League captain I played under was Bob Hungate, so I've got to say him, really. I'm not sure if Derek, Neil or Penny played for the AKCC, the Association of Kent Cricket Clubs. There was a competition where players were selected from various clubs to represent the county in I think it was a knockout competition. I'm just trying to think whether a Carl Openshaw, he might have captained that side. He seemed very astute. It appeared quite switched on. I'm not sure if he was the captain. I remember playing in a game up in Leicestershire in the final. It was. I can't remember.
John Kilby was captain.
It was John Kilby, was it?
Yeah.
But he was a good man. He was. He played up at St Lawrence and Highland Court, didn't he?
Yeah.
For Kent, I think Chris Tavares had a very measured approach to how he went about doing things. He was pretty analytical. He spoke to the senior players around him, your Woolmers and your Knotts and your Underwoods. It was just a shame in many respects that he wasn't given a longer period to establish his credentials as a captain. But I mean, I started when Asif was back and doing his second stint, or was it his first stint? So he was somebody from the 80s team who, you're not worshipped, but you're playing with a number of those players from that time within that transition period. And yeah, I mean, Cowdery was a good mate of mine. I'd just like to have seen Chris Tavray given a longer opportunity at captaining. I don't know what was going on between committee and him, or what. I don't know.
Just before we move on to tonight's star question, which is going to wrap things up, one other I want to get in here, which is another anonymous question. Said, if to all of you, if you'd not become cricketers, are there any other sports you'd have liked to have taken up professionally? How good are you at other things, Chris Penn?
I do like a game of petanque. I do like a game of petanque. But I, to be honest, it's got to be golf, isn't it? Really, although I do play, we all. To be honest, with every pro that I played with at Kent, they can all play football, hockey, rugby, golf, a decent game of golf. But if it was to be a sport, I'm afraid it'd have to be golf. Golf or cricket.
Every former professional or current professional cricketer is going to say golf is the answer to this question.
It's bad, isn't it?
I
did say petanque, Steve.
Yeah,
no,
I'm sure you're very good at it. Very underrated sport, actually. Neil, on that subject of golf, there are still people who talk about your benefit year legendary golf days. What was so good about them?
I have no idea. I'm hoping just people enjoyed themselves. That was the main thing. And they made me quite a bit of money, which was the most important thing. I think golf days are pretty reliant on the weather being nice. We played some horrible days. I can remember for other golf days. I remember poor Laurie Potter playing in one at Littlestone where he had no waterproofs, and it was just absolutely torrential rain. And the poor bugger had to go out and play another 18 hours in the afternoon. For me, rugby was my other love. I still love rugby now. I wish I could have played it. It wasn't a profession at that time when I was playing. I played a reasonable standard. I know I'd love to have a bit more, but and I came to golf quite late. You know, I think sort of the socio-economic side of it, being a golfer, was that we didn't have access to golf clubs at that stage or the facilities to play. So I was more fortunate that cricket took me into golf a little bit more because you got asked to go to all these nice golf courses and play.
Derek, any other sports that you used to love or still do?
I think when I was at school, it would have been football, and that might have been the case for a lot of people in those days. And then when I played professional cricket, golf. It was a good thing to do. It didn't require any training, which was always good. But I guess now I do quite a bit of cycling. And the nice thing about cycling is you don't get frustrated, with bad shots. And
you do if you're driving and they're in front of you.
Well, yeah, you do. But it's not too bad over here. Well, it is. You just don't keep on the roads because they're not that good at driving. Cycling's so nice because you can just get into a rhythm and not get frustrated. So I'd like to be a professional cyclist now, I think.
Richard, have you got an answer for on this? And please don't say golf, please.
I was going to say golf, but I won't say golf, all right? I thought a bit of bat and trap was something I'd like to have been a specialist at, actually. No, I mean, at school, I enjoyed all sports. I was reasonable at hockey, rugby. I didn't play as much as Neil would have done, but you had to play it at school when I was at school. Now that I can't say the one I wanted to say, I was a reasonable hockey player. I was a bit slow, and if I couldn't get the ball, I tended to get the player. And I got sent off a few times, I know that. But I enjoyed my hockey. I think it's a much more inclusive game than, say, cricket. Going back to the sport, I was going to suggest it's the most frustrating game ever. And at the moment, I'm not sure if I stand on the tee whether I'm going to hit it 90 degrees over there to make a nice little right angle or 90 degrees over there. I have no idea which way it's going to go. If I hit a straight one, that's made my round. I'm quite happy with that. My golf is shocking.
All right, let's move on to tonight's star question, which is going to wrap things up. Thank you to Martin, who sent it in, who wins a prize courtesy of Shepherd Neame Spitfire, who are looking after us while there's no cricket going on, and we're putting these online forums on Facebook Live and on Zoom. It's for all of you, for all of tonight's panel who joined Kent and would have been around and played with members of that great team, that golden era of Kent in the 1970s. Who would each of the panels say was the player from Kent's 70s era that inspired them the most? Derek, who inspired you?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think initially I used to go to the Kent Nets in the winter and bowl at the players, and Asif Iqbal was really quite inspiring. He encouraged and always was ready to give some advice. And then of course when I later played it, Alan Elam was around. He was a really good coach. And then, of course, Bob Warmer, Alan Knott. Those two were great to talk to, always happy to answer questions and sit behind in the change rooms and chat and impart knowledge. But I think really those two, above anyone else, sort of gave you the confidence that you could play and were always there. And, of course, they were great players, and that always helped.
Neil, was there any sort of extra pressure in the early 80s or indeed very late 70s when you started your career? Because they really were heady days, the 1970s for Kent.
They were, and we obviously did really well that we didn't win a thing for about 20 years. So, yeah, I think the heady days of the 70s, of going to Lord's finals. I mean, we were lucky enough to replicate Lord's finals, but we never came away with any silverware. I mean, played in three, I think, in the 80s, and Ellie will know that as well. Sort of, he played in those games. Yeah, I think there's pressure on when you've had a successful side, but there was a huge rebuilding. Players of the likes of Knott and Underwood were coming towards the end of their career. Bob Warmer packed up because he was injured. And you started to lose those players, and it was a rebuilding job with a lot of young players. Myself, Mark Benson coming in, another guy, Simon Hinks, Ellie coming in, Derek, Chris Penn, sort of Graham Dilley, some of the younger spinners of Laurie Potter or Lindsay Wood, Guy Spellman, who was trying to get on the staff as an opening bowler. There was a lot of good young players, which was fantastic because, as I said to you earlier on, we'd all grown up with, and it was like, we're playing professional sport, being paid for it, but we're playing with your mates. Back to your original question, genius, Alan Knott, off the wall, Alan Knott, but if you didn't listen to him and listen to some of his theories, and he would never force anything on you, he'd just make you think, which was, as a young player, I can remember patting back 6 balls at Ilford in one of my first championship game. And he came down to me at the end of the over and said, well played. I'd have been out 4 times that over. And you're thinking, no, you wouldn't have been. But it made you feel that, there's a bloke who's played 97 test matches or whatever, 85 test matches. So he would be one. Bob Warmer, as a player, brilliant to listen to. Sadly for him as a coach, when he came back to Kent, it was probably too early in his coaching career to come straight back to Kent and start to coach players that he had relationships with. And in the other way, us players have had relationships with him. So we didn't take him perhaps as a coach as we should have done. And obviously his record at Warwickshire, Pakistan, South Africa was outstanding. But the person that was the biggest influence on my career was Brian Luckhurst. He was running the second team when I started playing in the second team. He just finished almost immediately after the 75 or 75, 76 Ashes series where they got battered by Lillian Thompson, and Brian was running the second team. And Brian had a lot of faults, and he'd play every ball of every day, bless him. And it was so stressed out at times, but the knowledge you got as a 17-year-old kid from a guy who'd just been playing Test cricket 6 months prior to that was something that you couldn't buy.
And Chris, you must have spent time as a kid watching some of these people play, and then you're in the nets with them. You're in the middle with them.
Yeah, I could say 18 years old. I played my first Kent Sunday League game. I think Ellie may have been injured, actually. Put his hand through a caravan window.
Still got the scar.
There you go. Look, how about that? A bit like Liverpool now, Steve. I think when we were being following that great '70s era, a bit like the Liverpool team for a long time. They haven't, and now they're close to winning. They just can't get rid of that Keegan Shankly era that went on before. And we were very similar. God, crikey, I sat next to Derek Underwood and my first match for Kent and called him Sir or Mister, you know. But
quite right.
Indeed, and travel with Notty. Derek and I travelled with Notty. What a pain in the backside he was to travel with, but what an inspiration. Coaching, I would say Alan Elam and a chap called Richard Hills. There's a name for you. He helped me out an awful lot as a youngster, Richard Hills. But I would have to say both Ellie and Neil and myself played a lot of cricket in South Africa. Graham Johnson. So Graham Johnson was my biggest. But crikey, what a lot to sit next to. Even have the honour to be good enough to change next to me, you know. But a very, very difficult period for Kent young players at that time.
That's two mentions for Graham Johnson. Derek, we'll just throw you back in a second. I just want to get Richard's thoughts on this question.
As Derek started, it's a very difficult question. I mean, I completely agree with the side of the 70s for me growing up. I was a teenager and everything like that. Even the late side of the 60s, I just started, I was born in Kent, all that sort of thing, and I started watching them play. Some of the characters, people like Norman Graham, he was just coming to the end in 1977, that sort of time. We were playing some second-team cricket with him, but he was a real character. David Nichols was another one who's a real character, who were just coming to the back end of their careers. But the guys have mentioned the names. Luckhurst was quite a big influence on me. Walmer and Shepherd taught me some of the skills of bowling, so I've got to put them in there. On debut, batting with Derek Underwood, he was very encouraging to me. It sort of took me under his wing for a while. But to have been in the presence of those people, and people, you mentioned Alan Knott, he certainly was a genius, not only as a cricketer, but when he said something, it was completely relevant. And tapping into his brain and the memories he had, or the information he had, was staggering. But Derek Underwood, for me, was the one who sort of, as I say, took me under his wing a little bit. But there were a number of influences all throughout. Just playing with, just knowing that Colin Cowdrey had been at the club and that sort of thing. So there's so many great names from that era. But Derek Underwood, if I was to single one out, it would be Derek Underwood, although there was a lot of help from a lot of other people. And Colin Page, to be fair, he gave me a chance. We haven't really mentioned him. He gave us all a chance to start off. Lucky was running the second, etc., etc., etc. It's all been said. But Page, he was a bit of an influence. Whether it was an inspiration or not, I don't know. But he gave you a chance. That's for sure.
Derek, you wanted to come back, did you?
Yeah, Richard touched on it at the end. Yeah, I was going to say Colin Page was a great influence on me, and probably everyone here on the panel. He was a very good coach. I mean, not necessarily technically, but
no.
I think everyone respected him because he'd come through the 60s. He'd been a fairly good player, and of course he was teamed with Les Ames, and he was still around when we played, and was always in the background, and he occasionally made the odd comments, which, I mean, if Les Ames said some words of encouragement to you, it meant a lot. So, I mean, as all the boys have said, I mean, there were so many names there, and so many characters, and so many good players. It was such a fabulous experience to be there, really.
Some of the panel will have travelled with Claude Lewis, who was a scorer as well.
Yeah.
And he was another one. I mean, he scored. He was part of Kent as a player, as a scorer for 50 odd years or so. And traveling. Sorry.
From the 30s, he played in the 30s.
Yes, yeah. But traveling with him, like anyone with that vast amount of knowledge, was an experience.
He still
Thank you very
Mark
much,
Benson
chap.
was playing a miss. Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, go on.
Poor old Claude Lewis still kept thinking that Mark Benson would have played for England a lot more if he hadn't played and missed quite so much. Though.
He used to play inside the line, didn't he? He used to play
exactly.
Yes.
How infuriating to bowl at, surely. Of course.
Well, there was a guy called Shaw who played. I can't remember his first name at Scarborough for Yorkshire. Mark Benson and I had to go out and bat for a couple of overs at the end of the day's play, and Mark Benson left every ball, and this guy got a standing ovation from the terrace at Yorkshire, at Scarborough, thinking that he played and missed all 6 balls, and even Benny at the end of it, because our mid-wicket conversations invariably meant I walked 22 yards to have a chat with him, and he said to me, "Did I miss those? Did I miss?" I said, "No, I know you played and left them all." Oh, that's all right. He was really perturbed that everybody thought, and to be honest, probably a lot of people still do think that at that early stage he played and missed a lot, where he just lined up off stump and left the ball as well as anybody could.
That must have been infuriating to bowl at. It must have driven you absolutely around the twist. Listen, lads, our time is up. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us tonight. Well done to Martin, who sent in the star question and wins the prize courtesy of Shepherd Neame. Thank you to all of you for joining us for the last hour. Thank you to you, Chris Penn, for joining us for the last 40 minutes or so. Derek Aslett, great to have you with us from Australia. What are you going to do now? Go straight to bed?
Well, yeah, I think I might. I'm actually going down south to a place called Dunsborough, which is about 300 kilometres south. So probably get a couple of hours sleep and then head off down there.
Thank you very much for joining us in the middle of the night. Richard, it's great to see you. We'll see you again soon, I hope. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. Neil Taylor, great to have you with us. Are you back on the golf course now that they're open again?
Trying to, but luckily with the new ECB directives, we're able to go out and do a bit of one-to-one coaching. So I'm trying to make the most of that while the sun and the weather is really nice. But yeah, trying to get back on the golf course. Our boys' trip away has been cancelled, obviously, but we normally go on our little golf trip. So a bit of coaching to try and get back to whatever we call now the normal.
Yeah, whatever it is, yeah. And Chris Penn, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem. I'm the only one young enough to still be working, so I'm back at work tomorrow. St Edmunds School. We're back up the road, getting the year sixes back into education, whilst those lads obviously spend their pension.
Yeah, some of us are furloughed. It's the best thing's ever happened to us. Chris, what you've got to do now is you've got to hit leave. All right, I don't want to do.
How many fingers, Steve?
See you sitting there. That's what you've got to hit leave, all right? I don't want you here next Monday. Well, I'd love to have you here next Monday, but you know what I mean. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your questions. We'll see you again next Monday for another session. Keep on the website, Kent Socials, details on Tuesday on next Monday session. Ta-ra.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, Benny.